late December 1942. Cold rain swept across the French countryside near Melun as engine noise rolled over the misted fields, low, heavy, uneven. Villagers looked skyward and saw a crippled American bomber descending in slow agony. Smoke streaked one wing, another engine sputtered flame. It was a flying fortress, the B-70F number 41244585, codenamed Wolfhound. Shot up after a raid over Rouen, the crew had lost direction in their escort. Out of fuel and time, they dropped gear and set her down on German-occupied soil. Within minutes, Wehrmacht trucks arrived. Officers expected wreckage. Instead, they found a wounded colossus resting intact upon churned mud, a machine taller than a two-story house, massive yet strangely elegant. Its olive-green fuselage bristled with gun barrels, almost animal in appearance. Soldiers approached with rifles raised, half believing it might still fight back. Inside, the American crew surrendered quietly. Then the Germans saw what their aircraft industry had never produced, a fortress that flew. Luftwaffe recovery teams swarmed the field. Under floodlight glare, they examined the unfamiliar creature. 4 Wright Cyclone R-820 radials, thick armor plating, internal walkways wide enough for crew to move mid-flight. Along its spine, glass turrets gleamed like the facets of an iron cathedral. Even stripped of power, the presence of the B-17 dominated the night. "It looks alive," whispered a sergeant, brushing soot from the U.S. insignia. Major Hans-Werner Lange, technical officer from Rechlin's Evaluation Unit, arrived before dawn. He circled the bomber slowly, fingers tracing bullet dents frozen in rain. "Bring engineers," he ordered. "Every switch, every circuit, nothing moves until it's catalogued." They named it A3+AE, marking its new identity within Luftwaffe Research Command. For the Germans, salvaging an undamaged flying fortress was an event of almost mythic proportion. Until then, they had known the aircraft only as distant silhouettes, tight box formations spilling .50 caliber fire into blue sky. Fighter pilots called them fliegende Stachelschwein, flying porcupines, because every approach met a hail of steel. For the first time, they could touch the quills. At Villacoublay airfield outside Paris, mechanics began the resurrection. Damaged engines were replaced with salvaged parts from downed B-17s, instruments patched, bullet holes sealed with aluminum panels beaten out by hand. The bomber's electrical grids astonished them. Multiple redundant circuits, self-sealing fuel lines, oxygen systems feeding 10 men simultaneously. Most extraordinary were the gun stations. Twin Brownings in the tail, ball turret beneath, dorsal and ventral emplacements, waist positions on both sides, and a rotating top turret braced by gyro stabilizers. In all, 12.50 caliber weapons, each delivering 800 rounds per minute. Lange's report to Berlin captured the German reaction in meticulous understatement. Defensive potential of captured U.S. bomber exceeds expectations. Complete engagement coverage, no blind arc fore or aft. Crew coordination executed through intercom wired network. System superior to any comparable Luftwaffe aircraft. But words failed to convey emotion. The men maintaining the captured fortress felt something rare in war, admiration for the enemy's craft. Here was a machine built on philosophy opposite to their own. German bombers like the He-111 and Do-17 were slim, efficient, dependent on fighter escort. The B-17 was brute resilience made airworthy, a flying anvil that invited attack only to survive it. By early 1943, the aircraft was ready. Painted hastily with black crosses and fresh serials, A3+AE taxied down the fog-slick runway under German control. Its 4 Cyclones thundered in alien rhythm. Observers lined the perimeter fences as Captain Robert Rode, one of Rechlin's bravest test pilots, advanced the throttles. The earth trembled. Snow blew backward in great clouds. The massive machine lifted cleanly, gracefully, almost contemptuously into the gray French sky. Rode's first comments crackled over radio. Flies heavy but obedient. Power delivery immense. Visibility excellent through plexiglass. Stability remarkable. He returned 40 minutes later, exhilarated and uneasy. "If they build thousands," he told Lange, "then no city in Europe is safe." The evaluation group quickly realized the value of secrecy. The bomber was flown to Rechlin in Germany, then to Oranienburg, headquarters of Kampfgeschwader 200, the Luftwaffe's clandestine operations division. There it would serve 2 purposes, espionage and education. Engineers stripped its turrets, mapped armor layout, and photographed internal wiring for technical archives. Pilots learned its strengths. Briefing officers drafted countermeasures. Yet inside those same hangars, awe lingered. The fortress dwarfed everything around it. Standing beside it, even battle-scarred Heinkel crews found themselves whispering. Its fuselage carried the feel of inevitability. Each hatch latched with decisive clicks, each system doubled for reliability. Painters labeled ammunition chutes "no step" in English, warnings they left untouched out of respect. During night assembly tests, the Germans simulated defensive firings with inert rounds. Spitting flame from every arc, the captured machine created its own constellation of muzzle flashes. "A fortress indeed," murmured Lang, "one that has learned to breathe fire." In February 1943, Luftwaffe command gathered for demonstration flights. Generals, engineers, and veteran fighter aces attended, a council of disbelief. From takeoff to landing, A3+AE performed flawlessly. Its hydraulic turrets moved smoother than German designs. Its armor absorbed practice hits without shattering. When Senior Officer Oberstein asked whether such production could be Germans' equal, Lange replied simply, "They forge these like we forge bullets." What none openly admitted, but many felt, was the foreboding beneath admiration. Each screw, each feed belt represented an industrial army beyond imagination. Boeing, Douglas, Vega, thousands of workers united in steady rhythm of mass creation. The fortress was not merely an aircraft, it was a prophecy. That night in Rechlin's mess hall, over thin beer and maps stained with oil, Rode told Lang, "Our fighters kill 1, maybe 2, and 10 more appear. It's impossible math." Lang nodded, staring into his mug. "If this is how they build bombers," he said softly, "their victory is already airborne." Winter 1943. In the cold hangars of Oranienburg, shrouded in strict secrecy beneath the authority of Kampfgeschwader 200, the captured B-17 Wolfhound towered over the assembled German engineers like something from another age, equal parts wonder and threat. The Luftwaffe called it A3+AE, though to the technicians who swarmed over its flanks it remained Die Festung, the fortress. The first order of business was technical autopsy. Panels came off with surprising ease, no excessive rivet patterns, no delicate fittings. Wiring looms were color-coded, hydraulic lines clearly labeled. To mechanics accustomed to the complexity of German craft, it was shocking. An Oberingenieur from Junkers muttered, "This is built for soldiers, not for priests." Inside, the gun installations drew gasps. 11 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 12 if one counted the flexible nose mount, each with 500 to 1,000 round belts. Electric gun sights synchronized elevation, and ammunition feeds curved like arteries through the fuselage. Waist gunners stood back-to-back roughly 10 feet apart, their firing arcs overlapping into an unbroken 360-degree sphere of death. The dorsal turret, Sperry type, rotated as smoothly as a clock's second hand. Its twin Brownings delivered almost 1/600 rounds per minute. The ventral ball turret seemed alien, a glass metal bubble with no escape once sealed. When test crews sat inside and swiveled the cannon grips, the entire floor hummed with contained energy. "Every man is his own fortress," one engineer breathed. Adolf Galland, inspector of fighter aviation, visited Rechlin and confessed his awe. "It unites every possible advantage in one bomber: armor, altitude, speed, and colossal defensive armament," he told colleagues. He inspected tracer belts loaded with incendiary compositions previously unseen in German ammunition. To him, this was a machine conceived not as an aircraft but as a system built explicitly to survive. Evaluations measured armor plates up to 13 millimeters over critical fuel tanks. Self-sealing bladders resisted puncture even after point-blank 303 fire. Each of its 4 Wright Cyclone R820 engines delivered 200 horsepower, driving the bomber smoothly past 295 miles per hour at altitude. A typical Luftwaffe He-111 cruised nearly 100 miles per hour slower. Where German frames relied on narrow beams and careful welds, Boeing's structure overflowed with redundant strength. Longerons thick as wrists, ribs stamped by industrial presses working day and night. Field Marshal Erhard Milch inspected the aircraft personally. Unlike Goering's bombast, Milch's realism was cold and precise. He noted its service ceiling near 30,000 feet, its heavy armor, and and the steady integration of defensive systems. Later, he told subordinates in Berlin, "Things do not look rosy for our great cities." The captured fortress underwent powered tests through the winter. Engineers filled its 1,700-gallon tanks and rearmed every turret with live ammunition for ballistic trials. When the first firing session began, gunnery officers positioned downrange alpha targets, wooden silhouettes simulating attacking fighters. At Lang's command, the machine erupted. Guns spat overlapping thunder, a constellation of flame that drenched the airfield in vibration. Shell casings cascaded through open doors, forming bronze drifts knee-deep. Observing officers shielded their faces from expelled gases. In 40 seconds of firing, 90 kilograms of bullets tore through the targets. One lieutenant turned pale. "Any fighter that presses attack into that cone," he said, "will not return." Records from Rechlin's archives confirm what pilots reported. Even 6 coordinated Bf-109s required perfect choreography to down a fortress. Approach too high, tail guns; too low, ball turret; too oblique, waist positions. And should one plane falter, the rest of the formation's interlocking fire sealed the gap. Defensive zones merged into impenetrable walls, visible in gun camera tracers as luminous spheres expanding in air. To many Luftwaffe observers, this was revelation turning to dread. By mid-1943, Wolfhound toured fighter bases across France and Germany. At Lierz that June, it stood beside other captured aircraft, Spitfires, P-47s, Mosquitoes, as engineers briefed frontline pilots. The display's lesson was blunt. These bombers were not prey, but predators that hunted as packs. The Luftwaffe developed head-on assault tactics in response, but even that demanded ice-cold precision at closure speeds exceeding 600 kilometers per hour. Few average fighters survived those passes more than 5 times. Test pilot Rode flew the bomber in mock combat with paired FW-190s. Each time the fighters swung into firing line, amber lightning from dorsal and ventral arcs met them. After landing, engineers examined the engagement film. Smoke still curled from gun barrels. Rode removed his headset, exhaling, "It's as if the ship fights by itself." Gallen later wrote privately, "We could match their planes, perhaps even better some, but not their factories. Every one of these carries the labor of 100,000 unknown men." That sentiment, half envy, half fatalism, spread through technical circles like rumor. The fortress was proof that the United States had perfected not only design but logistics. Each nut, turret, and sight was a triumph of collective discipline. In the following months, fragments of captured Apex technology, the Norden bomb sight, de-icing boots, oxygen regulators, were sent to German research centers. While engineers analyzed, the Allies refined. By late 1943, formations of hundreds of B-17s crossed the skies daily. Regensburg, Schweinfurt, Marienburg, Berlin, each name would soon echo devastation. The men who had inspected the fortress firsthand watched those attacks unfold from below, realizing they had been studying the future that now burned above them. Spring 1943. At Rechlin and later at Oranienburg, the sound of unfamiliar engines filled the air, an American rhythm of 4 cyclones throbbing in unmatched harmony. A captured B-17F, once Wolfhound, now bore German crosses under its wings, its olive paint dulled beneath exhaust soot. For the Luftwaffe officers gathered to fly it, this was an experience bordering on heresy. Major Hans von Kriegern was the first to take the co-pilot's seat beside Rechlin test veteran Robert Rode. He was accustomed to the He-111, an aircraft that demanded finesse, its twin Jumo engines temperamental but exact. When he settled into the Flying Fortress cockpit, he blinked in disbelief. Row after row of gauges, each redundantly paired, every control lever designed for ease, not artistry. The nose extended into glass infinity, a panoramic compared to the narrow-framed German bombers. "An entire world ahead," he muttered. At Lange's signal, Rode advanced throttles to 50% power. The 4 Wright Cyclones answered like choir voices, their combined 400 horsepower tearing the morning fog apart. As the giant moved forward, its ease surprised everyone. The tail lifted, the machine rose with grace, utterly at odds with its size. Airborne within seconds, it climbed smoothly through low cloud until altimeter needles hovered at 9,000 feet. Inside, the soundscape was different from anything the Luftwaffe knew. Less machine, more metronome. Vibration was balanced by remarkable engineering. thicker structural spars, and perfectly synchronized propellers. Even with one engine idled for test, the airplane climbed effortlessly. Rota banked left, right. The controls remained predictable. In his post-flight report, he wrote, "Should any crew lose an engine or two, this craft still returns home. It is the very definition of persistence." At the rear, technicians sat in gun positions to simulate coordination. Turrets rotated on gyro actuators unknown to German designs, stopping so precisely that crosshairs barely drifted when the bomber banked. Field trials with motion film cameras recorded firing tests, streams of tracers interlocking in geometric patterns so dense that pilots compared them to metal spider webs. Later, when Luftwaffe fighter schools screened the footage, black uniformed pilots sat stunned in silence. Every approach vector they habitually used to slay twin-engine bombers was now a death sentence. Engineers at Oranienburg tested fuel efficiency, oxygen distribution, ballistic camera feeds, even the radio transmitters originally used for formation calls. Each feature was redundant and fault-tolerant. The Luftwaffe noted, 4 independent electrical systems and triplicate flight controls. Pilot casualty does not render plane incapable. The realization hit like a moral bullet. This craft was more than a bomber. It was a philosophy cast in metal. One evening in April 1943, under mercury lights, Galland arrived to observe a live fire exercise. At a signal of flares, the fortress became a blazing planet of light. Top turret, tail, waist, nose, each spitting fire into the dark. The glow painted engine cowlings silver and the runway blood orange. When the staccato roar ended, the field smoked like a burned forest. Galland stood wordless for seconds, then said quietly, "This thing carries an army on its back." Subsequent mock engagements between the captured fortress and FW-190s proved its fearsome defense. Attackers approaching from the rear within 400 meters found their planes riddled even in simulation. Luftwaffe tacticians changed manuals overnight, recommending steep head-on dives to reduce exposure. Still, losses mounted across the Reich, proof that it was one thing to technically know the fortress and another to fight 100 of them in formation. By September, Wolfhound returned for evaluation after touring fighter wings from Leipzig to Lille. Hundreds of pilots had crawled through its corridors, counted gun ports, and studied blind spots that barely existed. Some tried to mock it, calling it ugly, brutal, an iron beast. But their voices grew thin compared to those who had flown against its kind. At Messerschmitt briefings, veteran aces whispered that the flying fortress was turning the sky into a fortified city, each plane a tower, each formation a wall. The Luftwaffe staff's final assessment, signed August 1943, summed up what no propaganda could disguise. The B-17 is a self-defending flying fort. Its operational concept renders current interception methods inefficient. Industrial capacities of enemy nations ensure saturation limits will surpass defensive capability of Germany by spring 1944. By autumn, that prophecy was fulfilled. During the Regensburg and Schweinfurt raids of 1943, hundreds of fortresses appeared over the German heartland. Factories burned beneath curtains of high-altitude ash. Observers on the ground reported formations stretching for kilometers, rows of metallic crosses casting shadows like clouds. Anti-aircraft fire scarred the sky red, yet the walls kept moving on, raining explosions with mathematical patience. The same soldiers who had once walked around Wolfhound now stared upward, realizing that the machine they studied was no longer curiosity but destiny. Inside headquarters, Erhard Milch noted his grim foresight. Things don't look rosy for our big cities. He was right. By year's end, Hamburg and Berlin smoldered under the iron rain of the flying fortress. Even Goering, ever boastful, fell into silence at briefings on loss statistics. Each dot on the map marked another proof that industrial war belonged to those who could outbuild, outfly, and outlast. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former glory. The sky above Germany no longer belonged to fighters. It belonged to the ceaseless thunder of Allied bombers. Each day, formations of B-17 flying fortresses crossed the Rhine at sunrise, their silver skins flashing like a metallic tide. Below, the pilots and officers who had once touched the captured Wolfhound could only watch and listen as their cities shook beneath the engines they had learned to respect. In underground bunkers at Oranienburg and Berlin, technical reports from Rechlin and KG-200 were still circulating. But those pages, filled with measurements, angles, and power outputs, read like necrologies for a defeated science. The Germans had uncovered every detail of the fortress: its 13mm armor plates, its 1700 horsepower engines, its defensive geometry of fire. But what they could not replicate was the industrial organism that birthed it. Erhard Milch had foreseen this as early as 1943, warning, "Things do not look rosy for our big cities." Now those words echoed through ruins lit by the reflection of burning refineries. When Rode and von Kriegern, the test pilots who had once flown the captured fortress, climbed into their own fighters to defend the Reich, they understood what they were facing more intimately than anyone. That knowledge did not empower them, it drained hope. From 30,000 feet, they could see the formations approaching, columns of 100, sometimes 200 B-17s in box formation, each wingtip to wingtip, each machine another fortified citadel. A Luftwaffe control officer remarked that daylight over Germany had become permanent dusk, the sun blotted by the metallic cloud of the fortress armada. Between Regensburg and Schweinfurt, factories for ball bearings, the mechanical heart of German industry, were hit so severely that production never recovered. Observers at command post Berchtesgaden reported that even Hitler hid in silence as the roar of engines crossed the Alps. Milch's prophecy, 28,000 to 30,000 feet, and we cannot touch them, had become fact. Fighter interceptors were too few, their fuel too scarce, their pilots too young. The fortress was unstoppable not because it was invincible, but because it was infinite. Inside the Luftwaffe's technical office, engineers compared their own creations with Boeing's monster. The He-177, intended as Germany's long-range bomber, remained a plagued, over-engineered dream. Its engines overheated, its conjoined power plants ignited mid-air. Next to it, the B-17 looked less like a product of genius and more like the consequence of rationality, a thesis in applied mass production. Each one built in 98 days, each interchangeable down to its rivets. Factories from Seattle to Vega manufactured frames by the hundreds every month. In contrast, Germany's sprawling industries had become paralyzed by bombing and bureaucracy. As the bombing intensified into 1944, Goering's confidence crumbled. Reports from the front quoted him snarling, "If a single enemy aircraft reaches the Ruhr, you may call me Meyer." That mockery became bitterly prophetic. Tens of thousands reached the Ruhr every week. When the last operational B-17 in German hands was destroyed in a 1944 raid at Auschwitz, its wreckage was buried under the same rubble that once sheltered the technicians who had rebuilt it. Luftwaffe records show that of the 7 fortresses operated by Germany, none survived the war, but their presence left a mark on those who flew them. Years later, von Kriegern remarked during interviews with Allied historians, "It was like piercing the future and feeling that it was made of steel and discipline." He acknowledged that the B-17 taught Germany's aviators a truth too late learned. Victory in the air no longer depended on brilliance, but on endurance. When the war ended, American forces discovered binders of technical notes in abandoned hangars, sketches of gun emplacements, oxygen systems, and armor curves, all copied in precise German handwriting. Among them were pages signed by Rechlin engineers captioned, "Study of Enemy Fortress, Beyond Our Capacity." Those pages now rest in archives as quiet testimony to an enemy's respect. Decades on, historians reflect that the B-17 did not end the war by fire alone. It ended it by exhaustion, mechanical, industrial, and moral. To the Luftwaffe officers who once flew their captured machine, its lesson was inescapable. Power is not how loud you roar, but how long you endure. They had seen it firsthand, at Rechlin, at Regensburg, over Berlin, the flying monument to a nation that had placed its faith in cooperation rather than cult. Standing beneath a modern memorial in Munich in 1958, former Luftwaffe technician Otto Lange summed up his memory to a young interviewer. "We loved our machines too much to make so many. They loved theirs just enough to make a million."